Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack. Advent is on us. We are in the midst of, in the church, of getting ready for Christmas. This season of Advent is 4 weeks before Christmas. One of my favorite quotes about what Advent is all about comes from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer, of course, many of us know because of his resistance to the Nazis and as well as his attempted, he was involved in a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. He tragically had his life ended on a gallows outside of his prison cell just before that concentration camp was liberated. So his quote that he writes in a letter to one of his closest friends is this. It says, "A prison cell in which one waits, hopes, and is completely dependent on the fact that the door of freedom has to be opened from the outside is not a bad picture of Advent." You can almost see a person who is inside of a prison cell saying something like this because he's hoping for that door of freedom to be opened for him. So what do you think? Is that a good picture for Advent?
I think so. From what I hear of it, it's a quote that's unfamiliar to me. Didn't hear it till this morning, but it certainly connects to the gospel this coming Sunday. Of what John the Baptist is asking, if you are the one who is to come, and seeing what's being done in His name. As far as healing and freeing the oppressed. So I think it's a challenging quote. Yes.
So my guest today is Tim Taugher. He's the pastor at St. Francis of Assisi in Hillcrest. Welcome to Encounter, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks,
Tim,
Phil.
you're no stranger to Encounter. I've had you on a couple of times. So
Yes.
so let's break that down a little bit more. So if Christ's coming in Advent is good news to those who are marginalized, like the quote from John the Baptist. It's saying the lame walk, the blind see, the prison doors are open, and Christ is viewed as being a liberator of this. And this is the evidence that he gives back to John that that he is the Messiah. Should we look for you or should we look for another one? It's almost like, Of course, if you were a lame person, if you were a blind person, if you were a person in prison, you would see it as good news, but not everybody did they?
No.
So how does that idea fit into what Advent is?
I see Advent. It's a wonderful season. It gets shortchanged in so many ways because of our cultural busyness at this time of the year and distractions, and I think it's hard for people to really maybe take time to center in on what the whole spirit of Advent is about. From my perspective, theologically and spiritually, Advent's broken up into two parts. And from what the readings in the church and the readings and the reflections. The first part of Advent reflects on the second coming of Christ.
Right.
And so really from the moment of first Sunday of Advent up to about the 17th of December, the focus is on the second coming of Christ. And then the liturgical readings take a shift that week and octave before to look at and reflect on the first coming of Christ and the incarnation and the celebration of Christmas on the 25th. So that first part gives us an opportunity to reflect on, Christ's presence now and yet to come.
Right.
That whole theology of the kingdom of God is here but not yet, and so it's connects with that. And also an overarching theme, powerful theme too. Isaiah, I think the readings of Advent are just so magnificent and beautiful.
Right, yeah.
You know, they have such imagery, and they speak about transformation.
And the peaceable kingdom.
The peaceable kingdom.
The lions laying with the lambs, and the ascension of the mountain where peace is going to be.
Yeah, there's a whole strong theme of justice.
It is.
I look at Advent as, you know, a season of justice, you know, because of the readings are so rooted in that, in Isaiah's call of the peaceable kingdom, as well as the gospel readings. You know, the image too of Isaiah 2 about the plowshares, you know,
right,
and the plowshares and the pruning hooks, no more war. So there's just all these things that are brought to our focus in this Advent season. So it's I just moved by it, and I always wish that people could take more time to have it. Like you said, you know, we have 4 weeks of Advent, but really it's almost 3.5 this year,
right?
With Christmas being a Wednesday, so it's kind of really chopped down.
Yeah, that week is going to like break down really quickly.
Yeah.
So as far as like you know, your church and the celebration of Advent, how do you get people to reflect and to slow down and to really enter into an Advent of waiting and preparation for the coming of the Christ, who is the both the liberator of the oppressed, and even sometimes I think, you know, the thing that we don't understand is that we are that person. We are the oppressed. We are the person that Jesus wants to liberate, and we don't see that. We don't see that kind of clearly, and because we're so busy trying to, you know, do nice things and be nice things to others, and put all the effort into buying stuff so that we can get it underneath the Christmas tree. You know, how do we get people to slow down and to think through, you know, where their place is in Advent?
Well, you know, at the parish, you know, number one, every Sunday we have the Advent wreath. You know, we give that, you know, focus during the liturgy, where we have. You know, have before Advent starts, have families in the parish sign up, you know, to say a prayer and then to light the candle or candles, and each week of the Advent season. So that gets families involved, and this year, you know, we had gave out a set of candles and everything to encourage families at home to have their own Advent wreath and light the candles, and to give some time, just some pause before you have dinner or wherever your family time is. You know, to remember we're in the Advent season, and it's a hands-on thing, and people like that. And that was well received. The candles were all gone, so I'm thinking for next year to do it again. It's the first time we really put a set of candles out for people to take. And then the other thing is, and they go well. I think we had about 250 or 250 blue books. They're little blue books. Blue because that's color too of Advent.
Of Advent,
and so and people seem to enjoy that. They're gone within the weekend, and it's for their personal reading. This year, the Blue Book focuses on angels. Angels are so much part of the Christmas story and the message. So one side is stories about the angels and theology of angels, and then the right side takes the scripture of the previous Sunday of the gospel and breaks it down each day to reflect on the gospels. That is good. You know, I think people. So that's a good sign that they took them. So hopefully they're using them. And you know, I think there's so many, you know, on the social media, on the internet. There's so many good things out there, and I try to steer people to that. Using their phones or their, you know, iPhones or computer in the office or whatever. We have a person in our Catholic community evangelization outfit called Dynamic Catholic, and they were offering the best Advent ever. You know, they'll send you an email every day if you sign up, and use a 3-minute video Matt Kelly does on the theme of the Advent season. So, you know, I think all those things help people take time to get ready.
And really, I mean, what it requires is a little bit of silence, a little bit of contemplation, a little bit of time set aside for prayer and looking at your life a little bit differently, and being able to pull away a little bit from the mad rush that we have. As you said, we only have 3.5 weeks this year to get ready for Christmas, and so I'm sure people feel that pressure, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. And and Advent started this year on Thanksgiving weekend too, which kind of
jars everybody.
Yeah, it's all on top of each other. Last year we at least had a week break from Thanksgiving to Advent, and that felt good. But this year it just felt, oh my gosh, we're right into it.
Yeah, and you had it like you were right between what we call Black Friday, which is when the stores go into the black, and Cyber Monday, which happens on Monday, and you have the first Sunday of Advent right there on Christmas, right between those two shopping days, and so you're sitting there going, on Sunday I've got to talk about the end of the world, and everybody's just trying to keep up with the world as it is. Yeah, it must be hard for a pastor to come up with a sermon in the midst of that, right?
Yes. In fact, this year, the passage from the gospel, that first Sunday of Advent, was, stay awake.
Right, stay awake.
And someone I know heard that gospel Sunday, and he died Sunday on Monday. And I was just thinking, it just was a jarring thing to think, wow, we have to take time. What are we doing with our lives?
Where are we going?
Yeah, right.
There's on that Sunday, we had to cancel service because of how much ice we had. We had like a quarter to half an inch of ice. But in my reflections that I even did the following week, I decided to give two short homilies that kind of caught everybody up to where Advent was. I talked a little bit about our society's denial of death by Ernest. Denial of Death, of course, is a title of a sermon a book by Ernest Becker, which he basically says that within our culture, we don't want to have silence. We don't want to have these moments of reflection, because basically it reminds us that we're mortal. We would rather just go through the stress and the cortisol-inducing kind of busyness that we have within our culture, where we're constantly moving forward, and not having to sit and reflect on the fact that we're mortal, because we at that point would be forced to ask some serious questions of ourselves, like you're saying. We would have to know where we're headed and why we're going there.
Right. But yeah, that storm knocked me off my program too, because I was supposed to leave that day for a silent retreat up in Massachusetts, and that never materialized because the weather deteriorated so bad, and by the time I would get out of here it was Tuesday, and then other things intervened on that, so that didn't happen. But I love silence, and I think silence is so important, and for me, my own spiritual life, I love taking time each day and like 20 minutes of silence, and I've been on silent retreats. The power of silence speaks so powerfully, and certainly Advent is connected to that silent waiting that we're to engage in our spiritual lives.
My guest today is Father Tim Taugher from St. Francis of Assisi, and we're talking a little bit about Advent, but we're wanting to move a little bit toward Christmas, because this is the December 15th, and we're kind of halfway through Advent, and we are like getting ready for when Christmas happens. Now there's a difference between the way that the world or the secular world has kind of used Christmas as a moment for shopping and the rest of that kind of thing, and the way that the Gospels present Christmas, especially when you start looking at Matthew's understanding of Christmas, which we're kind of headed toward. There's the intrigue with the three kings who come looking for Jesus, and there's the Herod who says, why don't you let me know so that I can go and worship him too, when you find this Christ child. And then you have, after that, the slaughter of the innocents, which is all part of how Matthew presents the coming of the Christ. So, what do you think about what are we really getting ready for in Advent, and how do we incorporate, as you said, the message of justice and peace within the scope of Christmas itself, even?
I believe the Advent season and then the Christmas season, or Christmas Day, Christmas season. Again, the story of Christmas is not some nice Hallmark story. It's easy to keep it that way, a nostalgic type of story and sentimental, and how sweet that is. And yet, when you look at Matthew's Gospel and hear it, I guess in our contemporary situation, in our culture today, when you look at the Christmas story, it speaks powerfully about what's happening to the lives of so many people in the world today. Asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants. Over the last few years up in the parish, we have a big outdoor display of the Christmas scene in the creche and all. And now there's a banner that hangs alongside of it saying immigrants and refugees are welcome.
Yeah.
Because, when you look at the story of Mary and Joseph and seeking refuge, seeking a place to stay. And then, and people, it's a story of today, people being held at the border. So I think
and even doctors being arrested because they want to give out free flu shots to refugees.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible.
Right. I think the Christmas story this year and in the last few years has a powerful message for us. And what are we doing for the Mary and Joseph and the child Jesus of our day? Locking them up in cages. It goes back to almost, I think, of the quote you started with, Bonhoeffer.
Mm-hmm.
Being in prison. Where the people are being imprisoned. What are we doing to bring freedom?
Right.
To them. And I think there's a call for us in our day today as people of faith. So I think the Christmas story is not something that just happened a long time ago. It's happening here today.
Mm-hmm.
As you've seen on the news, some places are showing the display of Mary and in a cage, separate from Joseph in a cage, and the child Jesus in a cage. Is what people are getting a message out. The story has a powerful message for us today.
Yeah, I've seen that meme on Facebook quite a bit, mm-hmm. where you have those cages and they're separated, and there is no cohesion to the family. They're not even they may be able to see each other, but to have a mother separated from her baby is
mm-hmm.
quite remarkable. It's
mm-hmm.
a terrible idea. For us to even contemplate when we look at the creche, because as you said, we're so nostalgic about the creche. We put it out there, and we always view it through the lens of the nostalgia that we have for the season, but not through the political and the social realities of the time or of our own period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get people? How do we make that message part of the story of Christmas? It seems to me as if the preacher has a tough
obligation,
has an obligation to do that. But then you also have the needs and the pull of your own congregation at that time for the nostalgia that they've experienced mm-hmm. around that story. So how does a pastor do that?
I think you could try to weave those stories together in a way that gives it meaning. It's nice to have the nostalgia. You still do. You can't help but have what you've experienced of Christmases, and I always I love Christmas Eve night. There's something special. I guess in what's happened, I think, in the culture too. Christmas Eve has taken on such significance that Christmas Day is almost like an afterthought.
Yeah.
Which is, I feel sad about that. It's just like there's so much focus on Christmas Eve. Certainly with the dinners and the gatherings and all that, and people are out, are up late, but. So it seems it almost becomes Christmas becomes that celebration, and then Christmas Day is just like, I'm tired out. I think it's what I like about the Christmas Eve is just there's just a sense of the holiness. Just everyone's filled with love. I guess is the word I want to use. You feel a sense of grace. It's a graced moment, and I've particularly feel that, and I like that feeling and experience. It's just so too bad we can't hold on that longer. I think it's also a challenge for preachers. The Christmas story doesn't end on Christmas Day, even though you'll go to the stores and
Right.
Valentine's Day stuff will be out basically.
Almost automatically, right?
But for us, there are 12 days of Christmas, to celebrate that in our own. That's personal as well as maybe faith communities doing it. Their own, to do that as well.
And if you came from an Orthodox perspective, Christmas doesn't even happen until Epiphany,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of an interesting, kind of an interesting correlation difference between Eastern and Western Christianity at that point.
Yeah. So it's I think again, we're influenced by our culture, but it's Christmas here, it's all done.
Yeah.
And it isn't. We have all these other major parts of the Christmas message to celebrate, reflect on, and to put into practice. In our lives. So again, it's the challenge of our faith communities going cultural in that aspect.
So as far as like some of the characters that we remember in Christmas, we remember, of course, the shepherds and Jesus and Mary and Joseph, and then you have the angels that your readings in the Blue Book kind of bring in. The angels, it's funny, that all through Advent, the announcement of the angels to mortals that this event is going to take place, and then the angels are prevalent even at the story of Jesus and his birth, and now they're the ones that announce the birth, and then you end up with angels warning Joseph and Mary to flee into Egypt, and you have angels that are warn the wise men not to go back to Herod, and the angels are really there in the midst of all this struggle to awaken us to the message, right? So how do you talk about that?
I don't know. You reminded me of something you just said there about Herod and and the wise men. They go to Herod. They encounter Christ, and then the angel tells them, they take another route home. And I think that's. Could overlook that, but I dwell on that, and I think it's how true that is in our own lives. If we have a deep encounter with Christ, you don't go back the same way.
Right.
You go on a new route in life.
You have to change. Yeah.
And so it's taken a new route in our life. So again, that's where the power of that Christmas message can deeply influence our lives. My encounter with Christ, am I taking a new route in life? And in the new year ahead, will I take a new route in life, a new direction in life, after my encounter with this Christmas celebration?
Mm-hmm. And it would seem to me like the new route would have to be, like I love that T.S. Eliot where he's talking about the wise men. And he says that in this new dispensation, we can't go back home in the same way.
Right.
So we have to then begin to look at our lives in a different sense. Like who am I in the given the values of the kingdom of God? So at that point, the issue of generosity to the poor, of making the world into a more equitable and more just place for people, is still a big part of the message of Christmas, isn't it?
It is, yeah, definitely. And again, it's the challenge for us to live that out and to make it practical. I like the, let's say, the theological, saying it's the Feast of the Incarnation. We have to enflesh the message of Christ. The love of God was enfleshed in the birth of Christ. And that makes it contemporary today for us to enflesh the love of God, to enflesh Christ in our lives, in the way we live our lives and how we live our lives.
Mm-hmm. We need to be able to see Jesus, and it reminds me a little bit of what I remember this Mennonite sermon that I heard where they were talking about the story of a reporter asking an Amish person, "Are you a Christian?" And the Amish person says, "Well, you see that house up there? That's owned by my neighbor. That's not a question for me. You should go ask him if I'm a Christian." And that becomes, that becomes the question of everyone. Mm-hmm. Am I truly a Christian? Am I truly following Jesus?
Yeah.
Well, my guest today has been Tim Taugher. Tim, it's been great to have you on Encounter again, and for us to be able to talk about what's happening at your church during Advent and the Christmas season. I want to leave you all with a poem. This is by Howard Thurman, where he's talking about the Christmas story, and he says this: "When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and the princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among the people, to make music in the heart." That's my prayer for you today on this Sunday of Advent. Look forward to Christmas and be gentle with yourselves.